The rain hammered against the rocky cliffs of the Afghan mountains like bullets from heaven. Staff Sergeant pressed his back against the cold stone, feeling the water seep through his tactical gear. His radio crackled with static as he tried to reach base camp for the third time in 10 minutes. "Command, this is Bravo Team. We have eyes on the target compound, but we're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate backup, over." Nothing but white noise answered him. Lieutenant Jake crawled over on his belly, his rifle dragging through the mud. Blood trickled down his forehead from where a piece of shrapnel had grazed him during the last barrage. "We can't stay here much longer. They've got us surrounded on 3 sides, and our ammo is running low." Nodded grimly. What was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into a nightmare. Intelligence had told them the compound was lightly defended, maybe 5 or 6 Taliban fighters at most. Instead, they had walked into a trap with at least 20 hostiles armed with RPGs and heavy machine guns. Petty Officer Sam slid down from his sniper position, his suit torn and muddy. "I count 4 more fighters moving in from the east. They're trying to flank us." He checked his ammunition. "I've got maybe 30 rounds left." The team had been pinned down for over 2 hours now. They had taken the high ground initially, thinking it would give them an advantage. Now that same elevation made them sitting ducks. Every time one of them tried to move, a hail of bullets forced them back behind cover. Corpsman David Park was tending to their youngest member, Seaman, who had taken a bullet in the shoulder during their initial retreat. The kid was trying to be tough, but could see the pain in his eyes. They needed to get him medical attention soon, or the wound could become serious. "Sir, the bleeding has stopped for now, but he needs real medical care," Park whispered to. "And we're all getting hypothermic in this rain." Looked at his watch. They had been off communication for over an hour. Standard protocol meant that backup would be dispatched if they missed their next check-in, but that was still 40 minutes away. At this rate, they might not last that long. The compound they were watching sat in the valley below them, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by high walls. Their mission was to gather intelligence on a high-value target reportedly hiding there, but now all could think about was getting his men out alive. Another burst of gunfire erupted from below, and bullets whined off the rocks around them, cursed under his breath. The enemy fighters were well-trained and well-equipped. This wasn't some ragtag group of insurgents. These were experienced fighters who knew exactly what they were doing. "Try to raise anyone on the radio. Air support base camp, even the local Afghan forces. We need help now," ordered. Adjusted his radio and tried different frequencies. "Negative, sir. Something is jamming our communications. Could be atmospheric interference from the storm, or they might have electronic warfare equipment down there." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Had been in tough spots before during his 8 years as a SEAL, but this felt different. They were outnumbered and completely cut off from support. The rain was getting heavier, making visibility almost zero. Suddenly grabbed arm. "Movement to the north. Looks like more fighters coming in. We're about to be completely surrounded." Peered through his scope and saw what was talking about. At least 6 more armed figures were working their way up the mountainside, using the storm as cover. Once they reached the higher positions, his team would have nowhere to go. "All right, listen up," said, gathering his men closer. "We have 2 choices. We can stay here and fight it out until our ammo runs dry, or we can try to break through their lines and reach the extraction point." "What about?" Park asked. "He can't move fast with that shoulder wound." "I can make it, sir," said through gritted teeth. "Don't leave me behind." Looked at each of his men. They were exhausted, wet, cold, and running low on ammunition. But they were SEALs, and SEALs never quit. He was about to make the call to attempt a breakout when suddenly held up his hand for silence. "Listen," whispered. "Do you hear that?" Through the pounding rain and distant gunfire, strained to hear what was talking about. At first, there was nothing but the howling wind. Then he heard it too, the distinct sound of an engine, but not like any vehicle he knew. It was quieter, more refined. "Motorcycle," whispered, "coming up the mountain road from the west." Raised his binoculars and peered through the rain. A single headlight cut through the darkness, weaving between the rocks and debris on the narrow mountain path. The rider was pushing hard, taking dangerous curves at speeds that should have been impossible in these conditions. "Who would be crazy enough to ride a bike up here in this weather?" Park muttered. The motorcycle was getting closer to their position. Could see now that it was an older model dirt bike, probably local manufacture. The rider was small, wearing dark clothing that blended with the storm. As the bike approached their hiding spot, made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he had. "Hold fire," he commanded quietly. "Let's see what happens." The motorcycle slowed as it neared their position. The rider seemed to know exactly where they were hiding. His hand moved to his sidearm, ready for anything. The bike came to a stop about 50 meters away, and the engine went silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rider dismounted and began walking toward them, hands visible and empty. As the figure got closer, realized something that shocked him. It was a woman. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair plastered to her head by the rain. She wore simple civilian clothes, jeans, boots, and a dark jacket. Most surprising of all, she seemed completely unafraid despite walking into what was obviously a combat zone. "American soldiers," she called out in accented but clear English. "I know you are there. I am here to help." And his team exchanged glances. This could be a trap, but something about the woman's demeanor suggested otherwise. She moved with purpose but without aggression, and she had deliberately announced herself instead of trying to surprise them. "Who are you?" called back, keeping his rifle trained on her. "My name is," she replied, continuing to walk closer. "I am from the village in the valley. The men who have you trapped, they are not from here. They came 3 days ago and took over our village. They killed my brother when he tried to resist." She stopped about 20 meters away, well within their defensive perimeter. Up close, could see that she was even younger than he had first thought, probably not more than 19 or 20. But her eyes held a hardness that spoke of someone who had seen too much violence. "These fighters," she continued, "they have been using our village as a base to attack coalition forces. They force our men to fight for them, and they take our food and supplies. We want them gone as much as you do." Had his rifle sights fixed on her, waiting for order. But something in the woman's voice convinced that she was telling the truth. Besides, if this was a trap, the enemy had already had plenty of opportunities to finish them off. "What kind of help are you talking about?" asked. Reached into her jacket pocket, moving slowly to avoid alarming them. She pulled out what looked like a hand-drawn map. "I know these mountains better than anyone. I grew up here. There is a path down the backside of this ridge that will take you around their positions. But you must move quickly. They are bringing more fighters up the main road." Crawled over to, "Sir, this could be our only chance. We can't hold this position much longer." Studied the young woman's face. He had learned to read people during his years in special operations, and everything about her suggested she was genuine. The pain in her voice when she mentioned her dead brother seemed real, and her detailed knowledge of the enemy positions matched what his team had observed. "Why should we trust you?" asked directly. "Because I want revenge for my brother," replied simply. "And because if you die up here, more of my people will die when the coalition sends more soldiers to look for you. This cycle of violence must end." Another volley of gunfire erupted from below and could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions. The enemy was definitely closing in. Time was running out for a decision. "Show me this path," said finally. Unfolded her crude map and pointed to a series of switchbacks marked on the paper. "Here, behind these rocks, there is a goat trail that leads down to a dry riverbed. From there, you can reach the main valley road without being seen. But the path is dangerous in this rain. One wrong step and you fall 200 meters. Groaned as Park helped him to his feet. The wounded SEAL was pale and shaky, but determined to keep moving. Looked at his men, they were exhausted and down to their last magazines of ammunition. "All right, we do this," decided. "You take point, help Park stay close to our guide, I'll bring up the rear." As they prepared to move, turned to with a serious expression. "Sergeant, there is something else you should know. The man you came here to find, the high-value target, he is not in the village anymore." Stopped. "What do you mean?" "He left yesterday with most of his important people. The fighters who remain are just a rear guard to cover his escape. You walked into a trap meant to delay any pursuit while he gets away." Felt his stomach drop at words. Their entire mission had been compromised from the start. Someone had leaked their plans, or their intelligence was completely wrong. Either way, they were risking their lives for nothing. "How do you know this?" he asked urgently. "Because I work in the village tea house where they held their meetings," explained as she led them toward the hidden path. I speak Pashto, Dari, and Arabic. They thought I was just a simple village girl who didn't understand what they were saying, but I heard everything. The team began following her along what seemed like an impossible route between massive boulders. The rain had made the rocks slippery as ice, and every step required careful placement. Was struggling despite Park's help, leaving small spots of blood on the wet stone. Suddenly held up a closed fist, signaling danger ahead. Through the rain, they could see two enemy fighters positioned on a ledge above them, scanning the mountainside with night vision scopes. They hadn't spotted the Americans yet, but they were looking in the right direction. Saw them too. Without hesitation, she cupped her hands around her mouth and made a sound that perfectly imitated a bird call native to these mountains. The two fighters looked toward the sound, then relaxed, apparently convinced it was just wildlife. "Clever girl," whispered approvingly. They continued down the treacherous path, moved like she had walked this route 1,000 times, never hesitating despite the dangerous conditions. She would occasionally stop and listen, then signal for them to wait while she checked for enemy positions. After 20 minutes of careful descent, they reached the dry riverbed she had mentioned. It was actually a narrow canyon carved out by centuries of flash floods, with walls 30 feet high on both sides. The bottom was covered with loose rocks that shifted underfoot, but at least they were out of sight from the enemy positions above. "This passage leads all the way to the main road," explained, pointing into the darkness ahead. "But we must be careful. During the monsoon season, these canyons can fill with water in minutes. If a flash flood comes, there is nowhere to escape." As if summoned by her words, a rumble of thunder echoed through the mountains, and the rain began falling even harder. Looked up at the narrow strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. Water was already starting to run down the rock faces in small streams. "How much farther?" he asked. "Maybe 1 kilometer, but the path gets narrower ahead, and there are several places where we must climb down rock falls." They pressed on, with leading and bringing up the rear. The sound of their boots on the loose rock seemed impossibly loud, but the storm was providing good cover for noise. Behind them, they could still hear occasional gunfire as the enemy fighters continued to search their abandoned position. Halfway through the canyon, Park called for a halt. Had collapsed against the canyon wall, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. The shoulder wound had reopened during their climb down, and his jacket was soaked with fresh blood. I can't make it," gasped. "Just leave me here, I'll slow you down." "Nobody gets left behind," said firmly. He turned to, "How much farther to a place where we can safely signal for extraction?" "There is a clearing about half a kilometer ahead where helicopters could land," she replied. "But it is exposed. The enemy patrols that area regularly." Made a quick decision. "You two continue with our guide and secure the landing zone. Park and I will bring. If we're not there in 30 minutes, call for extraction without us." "Sir, I don't think we should split up," protested. "That's an order, Lieutenant. Needs medical attention now, and we can't risk the entire team waiting for us." Reluctantly, and continued down the canyon with. And Park fashioned a makeshift stretcher using their ponchos and rifle slings, then carefully loaded onto it. As they struggled along the rocky canyon floor with their wounded teammate, found himself thinking about the young woman who had appeared out of nowhere to save them. There was something about her story that didn't quite add up. She claimed to want revenge for her brother's death, but she seemed too composed, too prepared, and her English was better than she initially let on. "Sir," Park panted as they maneuvered around a particularly large boulder, "do you think we can trust her?" "I don't know," admitted, "but right now she's our best chance of getting out of here alive." They heard voices echoing off the canyon walls behind them. The enemy fighters had found their trail, and Park picked up the pace, half carrying, half dragging on the improvised stretcher. The wounded SEAL was barely conscious now, mumbling incoherently. The canyon began to widen as they approached the exit. Could see light ahead, not daylight, but the reflected glow of flares in the distance. As they emerged from the narrow passage, they found themselves at the edge of a large clearing surrounded by low hills. His voice crackled through his earpiece. "Bravo, leader, we've secured the landing zone, but we have a problem. There are enemy vehicles approaching from the main road, at least 3 trucks full of fighters. ETA approximately 10 minutes. Looked across the clearing and spotted his 2 men positioned behind some rocks near the far edge. Was crouched beside them, pointing toward different positions around the clearing's perimeter. "What's our extraction status?" radioed back. "Still trying to raise anyone on the radio. The storm is interfering with everything." And Park carried across the open ground, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Every shadow could hide an enemy sniper, and every sound made them freeze and listen. They were almost to the others when heard something that made his blood run cold. The distinctive whine of an incoming mortar round. "Incoming!" shouted, diving to cover with his body as Park threw himself flat against the rocky ground. The mortar round exploded 50 meters to their left, sending chunks of rock and dirt flying through the air. The blast lit up the clearing like daylight for a split second, and caught a glimpse of muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the perimeter. They had walked into another trap. "Report," called into his radio as he and Park dragged toward the nearest cover, a pile of boulders near the center of the clearing. "We're pinned down, sir." His voice was nearly drowned out by gunfire. "At least 12 hostiles with automatic weapons, and they've got our position surrounded." His mind raced. The enemy had been one step ahead of them all night. Either they were dealing with exceptionally skilled fighters, or someone was feeding them information about American movements. His eyes found who was pressed against a rock 20 meters away, looking genuinely terrified. Another mortar round screamed overhead, this one landing closer. The explosion showered them with debris and left ears ringing. Through the chaos, he heard the rumble of vehicle engines getting louder. The reinforcements had spotted were almost here. "Park, stay with and keep pressure on that wound," ordered. "I'm going to try to reach the others." He sprinted across the open ground in a zigzag pattern, bullets whining past his head. Machine gun fire erupted from 3 different directions, forcing him to dive behind a fallen log just meters from where his teammates were pinned down. "Sir, they knew we were coming," said grimly as slid in beside him. "This whole clearing is pre-sighted for mortar fire. They've been planning this ambush." Looked over at who was huddled behind her boulder with tears streaming down her face. She caught his eye and mouthed something he couldn't hear over the gunfire. When she repeated it, he could make out the words, "I'm sorry." Understanding hit him like a physical blow. The young woman wasn't their savior, she was bait. The enemy had used her to lead them exactly where they wanted them, to a killing ground prepared in advance. Her brother probably was dead, making her story believable, but she was working with his killers now. But as watched her, he realized something else. The terror on her face wasn't an act. Whatever deal she had made with the enemy fighters, she was regretting it now. She was just a scared kid who had been forced into an impossible situation. The sound of diesel engines grew louder, and headlights began to sweep across the clearing as the enemy reinforcements arrived. Counted at least 4 vehicles, probably carrying 20 or more fighters. His small team was about to be completely overwhelmed. "Anyone got any bright ideas?" asked, reloading his rifle with one of his last magazines. Was about to respond when he heard something that made him look up at the stormy sky. Through the rain and wind, there was another sound, the distinctive thump-thump-thump of helicopter rotors. "Did anyone manage to get a message out?" he asked hopefully. Shook his head. "Radio's still dead, must be someone else's bird." But as the aircraft got closer, recognized the sound profile. It was an American Black Hawk, and it was flying fast and low despite the terrible weather conditions. Someone had either received their earlier distress calls or noticed they were overdue. The helicopter appeared through the storm clouds like an angel of mercy, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. But instead of landing, it began circling the clearing, and could see why. Enemy fighters were positioned all around the landing zone with RPGs and heavy machine guns. Any attempt to land would be suicide for the helicopter crew. The aircraft's door gunner opened fire on the enemy positions, his M240 machine gun sending long bursts of tracer rounds into the hills around the clearing. Several of the hostile firing positions went silent, but there were too many for one helicopter to suppress. Over the radio heard the pilot's voice. "Bravo team, this is Guardian Angel. We see your position, but the LZ is too hot for extraction. Can you mark enemy positions with smoke or flares?" Keyed his radio. "Guardian Angel, Bravo leader, we're almost out of ammunition and have one wounded. Enemy has mortars and is bringing up reinforcements. We need immediate close air support." "Roger that, Bravo leader, stand by." But even as the pilot acknowledged his request, New help wouldn't arrive in time. The enemy trucks had reached the clearing and were disgorging fighters who immediately spread out to surround the Americans' position. Within minutes, they would be completely overrun. That's when did something that surprised everyone. She stood up from behind her boulder, completely exposing herself to enemy fire, and began shouting in Pashto at the top of her voice. Her words carried clearly across the clearing despite the chaos of battle. Didn't speak the language, but her tone was unmistakable. She was arguing with the enemy fighters, pleading with them. Several of them actually stopped shooting and seemed to be listening to what she was saying. Then she did something even more shocking. She pulled something from her jacket pocket, not the map she had shown them earlier, but what looked like a small radio or cell phone. She held it up high where everyone could see it and realized what she was doing. She was bargaining for their lives, using whatever information or leverage she had to try to save the Americans who had trusted her, even though she had led them into the trap. Voice echoed across the clearing as she continued her desperate negotiation with the enemy fighters. Could see some of them lowering their weapons, while others seemed angry and were gesturing aggressively. Whatever she was offering them, it was causing serious disagreement among their ranks. "What is she doing?" whispered. Before could answer, one of the enemy fighters, apparently a leader based on his position and the way others deferred to him, shouted something back at in Pashto. His voice was filled with rage, and he raised his AK-47 toward her. Without thinking, broke cover and sprinted toward the young woman. He tackled her just as the enemy leader opened fire, and they both rolled behind the boulder as bullets chipped pieces of stone around them. "Why did you do that?" gasped, staring at with wide eyes. "I led you into a trap. I betrayed you." "Because you're just a kid caught in an impossible situation," replied, checking to make sure she wasn't hit. "And because I think you're trying to make it right." Tears were streaming down her face now. "They said they would kill everyone in my village if I didn't help them. My brother was already dead, but they had my little sister, my mother. I thought if I led you here, they would let my family go and you would just be captured, not killed." "What was that thing you showed them?" asked. "GPS coordinates," she admitted. "The location where your target really went. I overheard them planning his escape route when I served tea during their meetings. I was going to trade that information for your lives." The firing had resumed with renewed intensity. The enemy leader was clearly furious that his prisoner exchange had been ruined, and he was determined to finish the Americans off quickly. Could hear the helicopter circling overhead, but the pilot couldn't provide effective support without risking hitting the American position. "Guardian Angel Bravo Leader," called into his radio. "I'm going to mark our position with an infrared strobe. Danger close fire mission on anything that's not strobing." "Roger, Bravo Leader," cleared hot. Pulled out his IR strobe and activated it, then tossed it to and to mark their position. The helicopter immediately began making gun runs on the enemy positions, but there were still too many fighters for one aircraft to handle. That's when they heard a sound that changed everything, the roar of jet engines approaching fast and low. "All Bravo elements, this is Sword Flight," a new voice came over the radio. "Two A-10s inbound for close air support. Mark targets now." Looked across the clearing and saw that several enemy fighters had broken cover and were trying to flank their position. He aimed his laser designator at the largest group and called in the strike. "Sword Flight, Bravo Leader. Laser designated targets at grid 2847. Troops in the open, danger close." "Copy, Bravo Leader, shot." The first A-10 Thunderbolt came in like a storm of destruction. Its 30 cannon ripped through the enemy positions with a sound like giant canvas tearing. The effect was immediate and devastating. The coordinated enemy assault dissolved into chaos as fighters scrambled for whatever cover they could find. The second followed up with rocket strikes on the enemy vehicles, turning 3 of the trucks into burning wrecks. The remaining fighters, faced with overwhelming firepower from the air, began retreating toward the mountains. "Guardian Angel, the LZ is clear," the A-10 pilot reported. "You're good to go." The Black Hawk swooped in immediately, flaring just above the ground, and his team ran for the aircraft, carrying on their improvised stretcher. As they reached the helicopter, turned back for. She was still crouched behind her boulder, apparently afraid to move. Ran back to her, grabbing her arm. "Come on, you're coming with us," he shouted over the rotor noise. "I can't," she protested. "They'll kill my family." Not if they can't find them, replied. That information you have about where our target went, we're going to use it to roll up his entire network. Every single fighter in this region is going to be captured or eliminated. Your family will be safe. He helped her to her feet, and they ran together toward the waiting helicopter. The crew chief pulled them both aboard as the aircraft lifted off, carrying them away from the deadly clearing. As they flew through the storm toward the nearest medical facility, sat beside the young woman who had nearly gotten them all killed, but who had ultimately saved their lives. Was stable now, receiving IV fluids and proper medical care from the helicopter's medic. "What happens to me now?" asked quietly. Thought about that? She had valuable intelligence about enemy operations, but she had also been used by the enemy to set a trap. The military legal system would have to sort out her exact status. "That's not up to me," he said honestly. "But I'll make sure they know you tried to save us at the end. That has to count for something." 6 months later, received a letter through military channels. Had been relocated to a safe area with her surviving family members. The intelligence she provided had led to the capture of their original target and the disruption of a major enemy network. She was learning English and hoped to someday work as a translator for coalition forces. She had included a photo with the letter herself standing with a young girl who looked exactly like her. At the bottom, she had written in careful English, "My sister is safe now. Thank you for trusting me when I could not trust myself." Kept that letter in his gear for the rest of his deployment. A reminder that in war, the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with the choice to show mercy when you have every reason to seek revenge.